Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Imperial. This segment's being brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where busy professionals get their books done and published to educate consumers, grow their businesses, and to leave a legacy. I'm doing a series of spotlights on remarkable business brokers and intermediaries from across the country. Joining me on this segment is Gary Aldridge. He's the founder of Aldridge Valuation Advisors out of Nashville, Tennessee. Gary, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about your work and tell us specifically who are the types of clients that you specialize in helping.
Well, the work that I do is really teaching business owners how to maximize the value of their business. That applies to any business owner or CEO. Typically, anything under like 10 or 20 million in revenue, that's a perfect sweet spot. It applies to any industry, any location. So that's what I do, and those are really the target market for what I do.
We found that the inspiration to do this series is the fact that there's a lack of information. We wanted to shine a light on the process of selling a business and maximizing the valuation of it. What have you found? How prepared do you find business owners are when it comes time to selling their business?
Well, generally they're not prepared. Some of the data, this is from the Exit Planning Institute, says that there's like $10 trillion are going to change hands in the next 10 years, but less than half of those businesses have any sort of plan whatsoever about the transition, whether that's going to be a sale externally or internally. They're not prepared, and they haven't planned at all.
And since that's the case, what are sort of their concerns that are on their mind when they reach out to you? What are they thinking they need to know?
Well, they don't have a plan. What I mean is they don't know what they need or when they need it, and they don't even know where they're starting from. So, what I do with my process is really find out where they are today, and where they need to be and when. For example, a client came to me recently and said, Gary, I need to walk away with X dollars when I sell, and that's after broker fees, after all the attorneys and the CPAs and the taxes and everything. I need to walk away net with X amount of dollars, and I want to do that in 5 years. And that's a perfect scenario. So then we start with where he is today and see where that gap is. If you're here today and you want to be here in 5 years, now we know what the target is. And now we just got to work from A to Z to get there. So that's a perfect situation for him and for me.
So you mentioned he had a 5-year plan, so that is kind of some runway. Do you find that a lot of people are behind the 8 ball, or is 5 years a good range? When should people start planning?
They should start today. And the reason for that is you say, well, I'm not planning on selling today. That's okay. It takes a long time to move the needle on value, and you never know when that right buyer is going to come along. I mean, I worked for an employer some years ago, and they got calls from people wanting to buy them all the time. And finally, some guy called him and said, just tell me what you want. And he threw out a high number, and the guy said, fine, let's go. So you can't control the timing, and it takes a while to get there. So I would say start now. But to answer your question, 3 to 5 years is a good horizon. I had a prospect come to me and say, I'm going to sell in 18 months. What do I need to do to get more value? So that's really hard to do. It's hard to really ramp up your sales or gut your expenses or change your processes, change your technology in 18 months. That's a short window.
So you mentioned moving the needle. I want to dig into that a little bit. I know it's probably a broad question, but can you kind of give us a 10,000-foot view on like the areas of improvement and increasing valuation in a business? Like what levers are you pulling?
Well, people start with the numbers, and that's kind of a natural place to start. But when you're tweaking numbers about revenue and expenses, that's a kind of a growing value by addition. But where I want to focus is on people and processes and technology. That's more of a multiplication type. You get a lot more bang for your buck if you get the right people in the right seats, the right processes, and the processes all over every business, whether they're service oriented or manufacturing or hospitality, processes everywhere, and then technology. So, like a case in point with the client I'm talking about, we figured his value was talking about 700,000, and here 3 years later, he's probably around 4 million. So that's the right direction. That's what I mean by moving the needle. Well, it's on value.
I saw a statistic somewhere that they mentioned 80% of businesses that go on the market end up not selling. I'd imagine a
Right.
lot of those folks didn't work with an exit planner or an intermediary. Can you kind of tell us like how you help folks assure that their business is saleable and they're successful in selling?
Well, a lot of businesses aren't even sellable, and that's because the business is so dependent on the business owner himself or herself. So if you take them out of the equation, there's really nothing left. The biggest reason I find is what's called the value gap. And so the seller thinks his business is worth this, but the buyer's only willing to offer that. And there's a big gap between those two. And so that doesn't happen. So the sellers, a lot of times, due to misinformation or just lack of understanding, they don't know what their business is worth.
So we're just coming out of a pandemic right now, and a question on a lot of folks' mind is this really a good time to sell a business or buy a business for that matter? What have you seen out there as far as buyers and sellers and the opportunities today in this economy?
There's a lot of cash chasing good businesses. There's a great time to sell. The market is really hot. And I say that from other business brokers that I interact with. So they're always looking for good businesses, not just any business, but good businesses that fit their particular portfolio. So there's a lot of activity going on right now. It's a good time to buy or sell.
Gary, what inspired you to get into this field and help business owners plan their exit and sell their businesses? How did you get started?
I mean, I have a passion for value. For me, it's just like a scavenger hunt and like digging for gold and, pouring through the financials and getting to know the business owner and what's important to him or her. That's critical. What do they want? What do they need? And asking questions and listening. But I love the chase. I love the hunt for value. That's just kind of how I'm wired.
Fantastic. Gary, before I ask you my last question, is there anything that I didn't think to ask you that you feel is really important to share with a business owner that's considering selling in today's market?
Start now. That doesn't mean you're going to sell now. You may not plan to sell for 5 or 10 or 20 years, but I'd start now. And the first step I talk about is changing the mindset from that of a seller to a buyer. So if the seller will start looking at their business as if they're a buyer, then they'll start to be more objective about it and see what changes the buyer's going to make. If they go ahead and change them, they'll get more value for their business.
Gosh, it really sounds like a no-brainer because it's like, when is it a bad time to increase the value of your business or increase the sales? It's almost like you should call this like business growth planning from day one.
That's right.
That's what's fascinating. Gary, for folks listening now that are considering selling their business and they know they need to get stuff in order, and if they'd like to speak with you, how do they find you, connect with you, and learn more?
My website is Gary Aldridge. That's ALDRIDGE.com. My email is Gary@GaryAldridge.com. And I've also developed an online course, which they can go to what's called Leveraging You, YOU.com. And everything that I do, I've developed into an online course, and it's available to them there for, know, it's pretty economical.
Fantastic. Gary, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with my audience today, and I wish you continued success for you and for all of your clients.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate the opportunity.
That was Gary Aldridge, the founder of Aldridge Valuation Advisors out of Nashville, Tennessee. And this segment's being brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where busy professionals get their books done and published to educate consumers, grow their businesses and practices, and to leave a legacy. That's all for now. I'm Mark Imperial, and thanks for joining me.